There is a moment, one single, terrifying, beautiful moment, that divides your entire life into two halves. Before and after. For me, that moment happened on a rainy Tuesday night in November. I was 23 years old. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, back against the couch, a half-eaten pizza going cold on the coffee table, some show playing on TV that I wasn't actually watching. My phone was in my hand, and then it lit up. His name. Ethan. And the text beneath it, 6 words, 6 stupid, impossible, earth-shattering words, completely dismantled every wall I had spent 5 years carefully, painfully building around my own heart. We need to talk, I'm outside. I stared at those words until my screen went dark. Then I stared at the black screen. Then I read it again. Because here is the thing about Ethan that you need to understand before I tell you anything else. Ethan wasn't just my best friend. He wasn't just the person I called when my life fell apart, or the person who showed up with food when I forgot to eat, or the person whose laugh could make the worst day survivable. Ethan was the person I had been secretly, desperately, quietly, completely in love with since I was 18 years old. And Ethan was straight. Or at least that is what I told myself every single day for 5 years. That's what he told me too. But that cold, rainy, utterly ordinary Tuesday night in November, everything I thought I knew cracked right down the middle. And I need to tell you what happened, every part of it, because I think some of you watching this right now are living inside this exact story. You're loving someone who doesn't know it. You're burying something inside yourself that deserves to be free. You're terrified that if you say the truth out loud, if you let it actually exist in the air between you and the person you love most, you'll lose everything. This one is for you. My name is Jordan, and this is the story of the night my straight best friend confessed and changed absolutely everything. Let me take you back, way back. Before the confession, before the rain, before that text message detonated in my hands like a grenade with a 5-second fuse. Let me take you back to where it actually began. I met Ethan Walsh on the first day of freshman year at Harlow University in upstate New York. I remember that day with the kind of crystalline clarity that only truly significant moments carry, the way your brain somehow knows, even before you do, that something important is happening. It was September 3rd. The dining hall smelled like industrial pasta and cheap detergent. I was sitting alone at the very end of a long table, picking at a plate of sad fettuccine, trying very hard to look like I wasn't absolutely, completely, bone-deep terrified. Because I was terrified. Not just of college, not just of being away from home for the first time in a state where I didn't know a single soul, in a room full of strangers who all seemed to already have friends, inside jokes, histories together. I was terrified because of the thing I'd been carrying since I was 15 years old. The thing I hadn't spoken aloud to a single person in my life, not my parents, not my childhood best friend Mara, who I'd known since second grade, not the school counselor. Not God on the nights I tried praying it away. I was gay. And in the small Ohio town where I grew up, the kind of town with one stoplight, 3 churches, and a Friday night football game that the entire population attended like a religious obligation, being gay was not something you announced. Not if you wanted to survive. Not if you wanted to keep your friends, your family dinners, your sense of belonging to something. So I kept it buried, locked up so deep and so tight that some days I almost convinced myself it wasn't there. I smiled at the right moments. Laughed at the right jokes. Dated a girl named Cassie Myers for 6 months during junior year and spent most of it feeling like I was performing a role in a language I had never actually learned to speak. College was supposed to be different. College was supposed to be the place where I could finally exhale. But sitting alone in that dining hall on the very first afternoon of what was supposed to be my fresh start, I mostly felt like I was suffocating in a different zip code. And then Ethan sat down across from me. Not because we knew each other, not because anyone had introduced us or pointed him in my direction. He simply looked around the room, spotted the empty seat across from mine, carried his tray over like he'd been planning it, set it down with a decisive thunk, dropped into the chair, looked me dead in the eye, pointed at my plate and said, "That looks exactly like something my mom would make when she was trying to punish me." I blinked. Then, before I even processed what was happening, I laughed. A real laugh, not the performed, social laugh I'd been manufacturing for 3 years, an actual laugh that came from somewhere genuine. "I think I've had worse," I said. "Impossible," he said, then he extended his hand across the table. "Ethan Walsh, Connecticut, I hate mornings, I love terrible movies, and I'm already failing calculus, and it's been 4 hours, today, 4 hours." I shook his hand. Jordan Ellis, Ohio. I also hate mornings and I'm decent at calculus. His whole face changed. His eyes went wide. A grin spread across his face like I'd just told him he'd won something. Oh, he said with complete and total certainty, we're going to be best friends. And the ridiculous thing, the thing that still gets me when I think about it, is that he was right. He was completely, absolutely right. It really was that simple. One plate of bad pasta and a handshake across a dining hall table. That was it. That was the beginning of the most important relationship of my life. Within 2 weeks, we were inseparable, and I mean that in the most literal possible sense. We shared a floor in the same dormitory. He was 4 doors down, which meant that by the third week of school there was basically no boundary between his room and mine. His textbooks ended up on my desk. My headphones ended up on his pillow. We had an unspoken agreement that either door was always open. His roommate, a guy named Derek who slept 14 hours a day and communicated exclusively in grunts, didn't seem to mind. My roommate, a pre-med student named Paul who studied with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb, minded slightly more but tolerated it. Ethan was the kind of person who made every room feel more alive. He was funny, not in the loud, performative way that some people use humor as armor, but in the quiet, observational way that makes you feel like you're both in on a joke that the rest of the world hasn't caught yet. He noticed things, small things, the way the campus squirrels had clearly developed an organized strategy for stealing food. The way the professor in our shared English lit class always smelled faintly of peppermint, without exception, and what that probably meant about his inner life. He told stories about his family, his mom, who was a retired art teacher and filled every surface of their Connecticut house with ceramics she described as spiritually necessary. His dad, a quiet gentleman who coached Little League and cried at every single one of Ethan's high school graduation photos, with this warmth that made me ache a little because my own family was so much more buttoned up, so much more careful with their love. He was also objectively beautiful, and I know that sounds like something I should probably hedge or soften, but I'm telling you the story honestly, so here it is. Ethan Walsh was one of the most beautiful people I had ever seen, not in a flashy or obvious way. He was tall with dark hair that fell across his forehead when he forgot to get it cut, which was often. He had brown eyes the color of really good whiskey. I know that's a cliche, I know, but they were, and I'm not apologizing for it. He had this smile that started slow and took a second to fully arrive, and when it did, it felt like something had been switched on. He moved through the world with an ease that I envied and was comforted by in equal measure. And within about 3 weeks of knowing him, I was completely, helplessly, devastatingly in love with him. Which presented exactly one problem. He was straight. I knew this not because he announced it, or because the subject ever came up directly, not at first, but because I watched him. Because that's what you do when you're in love with someone you can't have. You watch, you catalog, you notice every look he gives to the girls in our English class. You notice the way his voice changes slightly when he's talking to someone he finds attractive. You notice the girl he danced with at the first party of the year. And the one he texted at 2 in the morning, and the one whose name he said with that particular softness that meant something. I noticed all of it, I filed it all away, and I told myself every single day in the same quiet, firm internal voice, he is straight, you are his friend, that is enough, that is everything, don't ruin it. And so I didn't. I took everything I felt, all the longing, all the tenderness, all the desperate wanting, and I folded it up as small as it would go, and I put it somewhere deep and interior and hidden. And I showed up every day as his best friend, only his best friend. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. And it was also, genuinely, the best friendship I'd ever had. Here is the thing about loving someone secretly for a long time. It changes the texture of your whole life. Every interaction exists on 2 levels simultaneously. There's the surface level, the jokes, the late-night study sessions, the movie marathons, the arguments about which dining hall had better coffee, the road trips, the shared history of 5 years of growing up side by side. And then there's the underneath level, the place where every casual touch means something more than it should. Where "I'm glad you exist" lands somewhere in your chest like a stone dropped in still water. Where "you're my best friend" is both the most beautiful and most heartbreaking sentence in the English language. I lived on both levels at once for 5 years. Let me tell you about some of those years. Sophomore year, Ethan dated a girl named Claire for 8 months. She was in our circle, a friend of friends, and she was lovely. Genuinely lovely, smart and funny and kind, with a sharp wit that matched his, and I liked her. I actually liked her, which made it both easier and harder. Easier because there was nothing to resent. Harder because I had to watch them together, had to watch the way he looked at her. Had to sit across from them at dinner tables and be the good friend, the supportive presence, the person who said, "Yeah, she's great, you two are great," and actually meant it and hated that I meant it. When they broke up, quietly, kindly, because that was who both of them were, Ethan came to my room at midnight and sat on the floor against my bed and said almost nothing for an hour. I sat next to him. We watched some terrible action movie on my laptop. He fell asleep around 2 a.m., his head dropping to my shoulder, and I sat there in the dark and didn't move for 3 hours because I didn't want to wake him, but also because I understood on some very basic and animal level that this was as close as I was ever going to get. His breath evening out against my collarbone, the warm weight of him, the impossible ordinary intimacy of it. In the morning, he woke up slightly disoriented, said "thanks, man," and went back to his room. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. Junior year was the year I finally came out. Not to everyone, not publicly, but to two people who mattered enormously. The first was Ethan. It happened in April of junior year on a Wednesday afternoon in the campus coffee shop we'd made our unofficial headquarters. We were supposed to be working on a paper for our contemporary literature class. We weren't working on the paper. We were talking the way we always ended up talking when we were supposed to be doing something else, following the thread of a conversation wherever it wanted to go, no particular destination, no urgency. I don't remember exactly how we got there. I think it started with something we were reading, some story about a character hiding a part of himself, and then it was just suddenly there, hovering in the air between us, and I heard myself say, "I need to tell you something." And Ethan put down his coffee. He looked at me, and something in the quality of his attention changed, became more focused, more present, the way it always did when he understood that something real was being asked of him. "Okay," he said quietly, "I'm listening." "I'm gay," I said. The word sat there. I had rehearsed this moment in my head probably 400 times. I had imagined every possible response. The awkward silence, the recalibration, the subtle shift in the friendship that might follow, the chance, small but real, that he would be uncomfortable, that things would change in ways I couldn't control. What actually happened was that Ethan Walsh looked at me, nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, I know." I stared at him. "What?" "I mean, I didn't know for certain," he said carefully. "I didn't want to assume, but I think I've sort of known for a while, or wondered." He tilted his head. "Are you okay?" "Am I okay?" I repeated, trying to process all of this. "That seemed like it cost you something to say." And it had. It had cost me enormously. And the fact that he saw that, the fact that his first instinct was not to make it about himself, not to perform an ally speech, not to make some reassuring joke that would have deflated the moment, but simply to look at me and ask if I was okay. I had to look away. "Yeah," I said, "I'm okay." "Good," he said, then he picked up his coffee again. "For what it's worth, it doesn't change anything for me, just so you know." "I know," I said. "Do you?" "Yeah," I said, "I do." We went back to not working on the paper, but something had shifted, something small and enormous at the same time. I was still carrying everything I felt for him. That hadn't changed, hadn't lessened by even a degree. But now there was also this: he knew who I was fully, and he was still sitting across from me, still here, still mine in the only way he'd ever been mine. It was enough. It had to be enough. The second person I told that year was my mother. That is a longer, harder story, and one I'll tell properly someday. But the short version is, she cried, and then she hugged me, and then she said, "I love you," and nothing changes that, and then she cried again. And my father took a little longer, a few weeks of quiet distance, some stilted phone calls, some things left unsaid, and then one Sunday evening he called me and said in his clipped, practical Ohio way, "I just want you to know, you're my son, full stop." I cried in my campus parking lot for 20 minutes after that call. Then I called Ethan and told him my dad had come around, and he said, obviously, how could he not? With such complete and uncomplicated certainty that I had to laugh. Senior year brought its own particular kind of ache. We both knew it was ending, the specific enchanted version of our friendship that college had made possible, where we could be in each other's orbit every single day with no explanation required. The real world was going to put distance between us. We were applying for different jobs in different cities. The extraordinary closeness we'd built over 3.5 years was going to have to survive geography, schedules, adult life's relentless capacity to eat your time. We didn't talk about this directly, we didn't need to, but I felt it underneath everything that year, a kind of low-grade grief, anticipatory and already aching. In February of senior year, Ethan kissed a guy at a party. I know this because he told me. We were walking back to campus at 2 in the morning after some mutual friend's birthday gathering, a little blurry around the edges, and he said it almost offhandedly. Something weird happened tonight. Yes. I kissed Marcus. I kept walking, kept my voice neutral. Marcus from the lacrosse team. Yeah. How was it? A pause. Weird, I don't know. Good, maybe. I don't know what it means. I looked at him. He was staring straight ahead, hands in his jacket pockets, his face doing that thing it did when he was processing something he hadn't finished making sense of yet. It doesn't have to mean anything, I said carefully, not right now. Yeah, he said, maybe. We walked the rest of the way back in silence, and I went to my room and lay on my bed with my heart pounding in a way that felt simultaneously like hope and like the most dangerous thing I'd ever allowed myself to feel. Because I was his best friend first, that came before everything else. Whatever he was working out, whatever this was, it wasn't about me. I wouldn't make it about me. He is figuring something out, I told myself. You be his friend, that's your job, that's the most important job. Nothing more was said about Marcus. Nothing more was said about that night. A few weeks later, Ethan started dating a girl named Priya who was studying architecture and made him laugh in a way I recognized as real. I liked Priya too. Another genuinely lovely person for me to like while quietly dismantling myself in private. We graduated in May. He moved to Boston. I moved to New York. We texted every day without fail, called a couple times a week, visited each other every month or two. The friendship survived, as I had trusted it would. But I was also in New York, slowly, carefully building a life in which I let myself be who I was. I went to bars where I didn't have to perform straightness. I went on a few dates. I started to understand slowly what it might feel like to not be holding myself at arm's length from my own life. And Ethan and Priya broke up after 14 months. He didn't tell me why exactly, just that it was his decision, that she was fine, that it just wasn't right. He said it on the phone in a voice that was more settled than sad, like someone who had made a hard choice they were at peace with. Are you okay? I asked him. Yeah, he said, actually yeah, I'm good. He sounded like he meant it, which confused me slightly, but I let it go. That was 8 months before the rainy Tuesday in November. That was 8 months before the text. I need to tell you about the 2 weeks before that Tuesday night. Because looking back on it with the clarity that hindsight grants you with almost cruel generosity, the signs were everywhere. I just wasn't letting myself see them. Ethan had been different. Something in him had shifted in the weeks after his breakup with Priya, some quality of his attention that I couldn't quite name. He was calling more, not just texting, actually calling in the evening, sometimes for no stated reason, just to talk. Our conversations were lasting longer, going deeper, ranging into territory we usually skirted around. One night we talked for 3 hours about what we each actually wanted from life, not career goals, not 5-year plans, but the texture of the life we were hoping to be living. He said things that surprised me, that he'd been feeling lately like he was performing a version of himself, that he wasn't sure some of the choices he'd made were really his own choices or just the path of least resistance, the thing that was expected. That he'd been spending a lot of time recently being very honest with himself about some things. I listened, I asked questions, I was his best friend doing what best friends do. But somewhere underneath my careful, practiced 5-year composure, something was vibrating at a very high frequency. Stop, I told myself, don't read into it, don't turn his process into something about you. And then, 10 days before the Tuesday, he visited New York for a weekend. We did the things we always did when he visited, walked the city more than was reasonable, ate at the places we'd been meaning to try, sat in my apartment watching movies. But this visit had a different quality to it. There were these pauses, moments where a silence stretched a beat longer than usual and something moved across his face that I couldn't read. Moments where I felt his eyes on me when he thought I wasn't looking. Moments where his hand would land on my arm or my shoulder during a conversation and stay there a little longer than casual touch requires, and I would feel it everywhere simultaneously and say nothing. On Sunday night, the last night of his visit, we were sitting on my couch, some movie winding down on the TV, both of us too tired to maintain real conversation. The city sounds came through the window, the room was warm, and out of nowhere he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Always." A pause. If you'd known when we first met, if you'd known then what you know now about yourself, about what you wanted, do you think things would have been different between us, I mean? The question landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. I was very, very careful with my next breath. What do you mean? I said, keeping my voice completely, professionally even. He was quiet for a second. I don't know exactly, I guess I've been thinking about missed things, moments you don't recognize as important until later. I looked at the TV. I think I've always been pretty clear about who I am, I said, which was true, and also completely avoided the question he was actually asking. Yeah, he said, yeah, I know. And then the movie ended and we talked about something else, and the next morning he took the train back to Boston, and I spent approximately 48 hours reconstructing that conversation from every possible angle before forcing myself to stop. He was not talking about what you think he was talking about, I told myself. Be his friend, that's your job. And then 10 days later, on a Tuesday night in November. We need to talk, I'm outside. I buzzed him up. I stood in my kitchen doing nothing while I heard the elevator, then his footsteps, then a knock on my door that was softer than his usual knock. Like he wasn't sure, even now, that he should be here. I opened the door. He was wet, it was raining, and he clearly hadn't had an umbrella. His dark hair was flattened against his forehead. He was wearing a gray jacket and his hands were in his pockets, and he looked, for the first time in the 5 years I had known him, genuinely, visibly scared, not the performative kind of scared, the real kind. The kind that lives in the jaw, in the eyes, in the set of the shoulders. Hey, he said. You're soaked, I said. Yeah. Come in. He came in, I got him a towel. He sat on my couch and I sat across from him in the chair I usually read in, and there were maybe 3 feet of space between us, and it felt like the widest 3 feet in the world. What's going on? I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of my voice. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together, looking at the floor, and he started to speak. He didn't look at me at first. He spoke to the floor or the middle distance or somewhere just to the right of my left ear. And what came out of him, haltingly at first, then with more momentum, the way something does when it's been held in too long and it finally finds a crack to flow through, was the truth, all of it. He told me that he had been lying to himself for a long time. He told me that the lying hadn't been deliberate exactly, that he genuinely believed the story he was telling, that he was straight, that the kiss with Marcus at that party senior year was just a thing that happened, a moment of confusion, not meaningful. That the reason his relationships with women always eventually felt hollow, not wrong, not bad, but hollow, like something essential was missing from them, was some personal failing of his. Some emotional unavailability he needed to work on, not a fundamental truth about who he was. He told me that after he and Priya broke up, he'd gone to therapy, not because he thought something was wrong with him, but because he was tired of the hollowness, tired of performing a version of himself that felt accurate on paper but not in his actual body, his actual heart. He told me what he'd figured out in therapy. He was quiet for a moment after that, and then he finally looked at me. I'm bisexual, Jordan, he said. I've known it for a while now, I've been sitting with it, and I needed to tell you first. You were always going to be the first person I told. My throat was doing something complicated. Okay, I said, thank you for telling me. He nodded, and then he kept looking at me, and the look on his face was doing that thing that I didn't know how to read, that thing I'd been not reading for weeks, months, years. That's not all, he said. And there it was. The pause that lasted 1,000 years. I waited, I didn't move. I think I may have stopped breathing entirely. I've been thinking a lot, he said slowly, carefully, feeling his way through each word like someone crossing a river on stepping stones, about the things I've told myself, the stories I believed because they were easier than the truth, and one of those stories was... He stopped. Ethan, I said, his name was barely a sound. One of those stories, he continued, was that what I feel for you is just friendship, that it's always been just friendship, that the reason you are the most important person in my life, the reason I compare everyone I meet to you, the reason I've never found anyone who made me feel the way you make me feel, I told myself that was just because you're my best friend. That's all, that's the whole explanation. The room was completely silent. And it's not, he said, it's not just that, I've known it for a long time, I think, but I didn't have the, he made a sound that was half a laugh, half something else. I couldn't say it to myself because once I say it, it's real, and once it's real, I have to do something about it. He was looking at me, his eyes were very brown, his hair was still wet from the rain. I'm in love with you, he said. I've been in love with you, I think, for years, and I am so sorry if this is, I know this is a lot and I know things are. Ethan. Complicated, and I understand if you need. Ethan. He stopped. I was crying, I didn't know when I had started crying. It had apparently just happened while I was preoccupied with breathing, and not moving and trying to understand if this was real. If this was actually happening in actual physical reality and not the 16,000 variations of this scene that I had rehearsed in the privacy of my own mind over the past 5 years. I have been in love with you, I said, since I was 18 years old. The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I'm going to be careful here, not because what happened next was anything but beautiful but because I want to get it right. I want to tell you the truth of it, not the version that fits neatly into a story. What happened next was not a movie moment. There was no swelling orchestra. Nobody swept across the room. We sat there in my apartment in New York in the quiet with the rain against the windows and our 5 years of history hanging in the air between us, and we looked at each other. And then I said, "How long have you known?" And he said, "The real answer, probably since that Sunday when I visited and I asked you that stupid question about whether things would have been different, and you answered it so carefully that I realized you'd been protecting yourself from something. And I thought, he shook his head. I thought if he has been protecting himself from something and if I've been protecting myself from the same thing." Ethan. Yeah. I've been protecting myself from this, I said, for 5 years. He closed his eyes. I know, he said. I'm so sorry, I needed to figure myself out. I needed to understand what I was feeling before I could. I know, I said. I'm not angry. I want you to know that I'm not angry. Are you sure? Was I checked. I went into all the corners of myself and I looked honestly for anger. And I found grief, yes, 5 years of it, all the time spent loving him from a careful distance, all the longing I had packed down and away. But anger, no, because I understood in my bones what it means to take a long time to know yourself. I had done that too in a different way. I had spent years not saying my own truth. I couldn't be angry at him for doing the same. I'm sure, I said. And then finally, after 5 years, I crossed the 3 feet of space between us. I want to be honest with you about the weeks that followed, because I think if I only tell you the beautiful part, the confession, the moment, the realization, I'm not actually giving you the real story. And this is supposed to be the real story. The weeks after were wonderful, they were also terrifying. Wonderful because it was him. Because every ordinary thing we did together had always been good, and now it was good, and also this new understanding, this new permission to feel everything I'd been not feeling for years. We were still the people who watched terrible movies and argued about coffee and knew each other's stories. But now when he reached for my hand in the dark of a movie theater, he reached for my hand. When he said, "I'm glad you exist," it meant what it had always silently meant. When I looked at him, I didn't have to look away. The terrifying part was the enormity of it. Because Ethan was also figuring out in real time a new understanding of himself. He was newly out to himself and now to me and eventually to others. And while he was settled in that understanding, genuinely settled, there were also all the adjustments that came with it. The recalibration. The moments where I could see him processing internally what it meant that a 5-year friendship had turned into something new. The vulnerability of being known that completely by someone and having to trust that they'll hold it carefully. I also had my own adjustments. 5 years of practice distance doesn't evaporate overnight. I had to learn, slowly, consciously, how to stop bracing for the disappointment, how to receive tenderness without deflecting it, how to believe that this was real and not a thing I had imagined so many times that it had somehow materialized. We talked about it, constantly, honestly, sometimes awkwardly. That was the thing that saved us, I think, the fact that 5 years of being each other's best friend had made us fluent in honesty with each other. We knew how to talk, we knew how to say the hard things, we knew how to sit with discomfort without running from it. 3 months in, one night in February, we were walking along the river in the city, bundled up against the cold, our breath visible in the air, and he stopped walking and turned to look at me. "Are you happy?" he asked, just like that, direct and simple. And I stood there on the riverbank in February with my best friend and the love of my life looking at me in the cold, and I took a full inventory of myself. My heart, my life, The thing I had been carrying and the fact that I was no longer carrying it alone. Yeah, I said, I really am. He smiled, that smile, the one that started slow and took a second to arrive. Good, he said, me too. And we kept walking. I've told you this story for a reason. Not just because it's mine, though it is. Not just because it has a beautiful ending, though it does, or at least a beautiful continuation, which is better than an ending. I've told you this story because of you, because I know that some of you watching right now are living inside some version of it. Maybe you're where I was, loving someone from a careful distance, convincing yourself that being close to them as a friend is enough, is everything, and you will not ruin it by wanting more. Maybe you're where Ethan was, knowing something about yourself that you haven't said yet, sitting with it in the dark, not ready, needing more time. Maybe you're somewhere else entirely, loving someone who doesn't love you back, or who doesn't know themselves yet, or who knows themselves perfectly but still can't give you what you need. I want to say some things to each of you. To the ones who are loving from a distance. I understand the logic of the distance. I lived inside that logic for 5 years. Keep the friendship, don't rock the boat. It's better to have them in your life this way than not at all. And that logic is not wrong. It kept me and Ethan in each other's lives when the alternative might have been losing each other entirely. The friendship was real. It was the foundation everything else was built on. But I also want you to hear this: the distance costs you something every single day, and you are allowed to know what you want. You are allowed to feel what you feel even if you can't do anything about it yet. Your love, even unspoken, even unrequited, is not a problem to be solved or a weakness to be managed. It's just love. Let yourself feel it even if you can't say it. You deserve to know your own heart. To the ones who are still figuring themselves out. Take the time you need, please. The world will tell you that you should have known sooner, or known differently, or known in the way someone else's story says you should have known. Ignore that. Your timeline is your own. Understanding yourself, really understanding yourself, past the noise of expectation and performance and the life you were handed versus the one that's actually yours, is not a process you can rush. It takes as long as it takes. And when you get there, when you finally say the thing you've been sitting with, the people who matter will be there on the other side of it. The ones who love you fully for who you actually are. To the ones who didn't get the ending I got. I know this story is painful to hear if yours ended differently. If you said the thing and the person you loved couldn't meet you there. If the confession didn't open a door but instead quietly closed one. I know that ending exists, and I know it is devastating, and I'm not going to tell you that it's secretly fine or that you'll be glad it happened. What I will tell you is this: the telling itself was brave. Loving someone with that kind of openness, even when it doesn't go the way you hoped, is an act of profound courage. You risked something real, you were honest when dishonesty would have been easier. That matters, you matter. And somewhere, someone is going to look at you with the same courage and tell you something that changes everything. I believe that. Ethan and I have been together for 8 months now. 8 months of the most ordinary and extraordinary days I have ever lived. He still makes every room feel more alive. He still notices the small things I miss. He still has that smile that starts slow and takes a second to fully arrive. He still shows up at my door in my life in every way that matters. We told his family 2 months ago over a Sunday dinner in Connecticut. His mom, who is exactly who I always imagined her to be, cried at the table in a way that was not at all sad, and then said, "Jordan, I always thought you were too important to just be a best friend." His father shook my hand and said, "About time," and then went back to his food. I told my parents on a phone call the same weekend. My mom said, oh honey, I'm so happy for you." My dad said, "He's a good man, I always thought so." 2 men who have loved each other for years, separately and privately and in all the wrong directions, finally loving each other out loud. That's the story. That's the whole story. I want to end by going back to where I started. That moment when your life splits in two. Before and after. I've been thinking about that lately, about how we talk about those moments as if they appear out of nowhere, as if they are lightning, random, and impossible to predict. But they're not, are they? Looking back, I can see exactly how that Tuesday night happened. I can see the 5 years of friendship that were the foundation, the conversations that were slowly moving us toward honesty, the therapy that gave Ethan the language for what he was feeling. The fact that we had both spent years being each other's safe place, which meant that when the truth finally needed a home, it knew where to go. The before and after moments don't come from nowhere, they come from everything that built them: every honest conversation, Every moment you chose to stay when leaving was easier. Every time you let someone see you clearly and they didn't look away. Every moment of love, spoken or not. The before and after moments are made of all the quiet in-between ones. And I think if you are watching this right now, if this story found you, it's because you are in some kind of in-between moment. You are in the quiet before the thing that changes everything. And what you do in that quiet matters. The honesty you practice, the truths you let yourself hold, the love you allow yourself to feel. Be in it, be present in the quiet, it is building towards something. I believe that. My name is Jordan, I was in love with my best friend for 5 years. He loves me back. And everything is different now. Thank you for watching.